The streets of Montgomery, Alabama, were quiet on a warm Friday evening when 17-year-old Marcus Williams found himself in the wrong place at the wrong time. A straight-A student with a promising future, Marcus had been walking home from a friend's house when a police cruiser suddenly pulled up next to him. Officers Reynolds and Carter stepped out, their expressions stern. "You match the description," Reynolds muttered, his hand instinctively resting on his holster. Marcus, confused, raised his hand slightly. "Description of what?" he asked, his voice steady despite the fear bubbling inside him. The officers didn't answer. Instead, they grabbed his arms, twisting them behind his back with unnecessary force. "You know exactly what," Carter sneered, shoving Marcus against the hood of the car. A small crowd began to gather, whispering among themselves. Marcus knew better than to resist. He had been taught from a young age to remain calm in situations like this, even when his heart pounded in his chest. As the officers cuffed him, Marcus caught sight of a few of his classmates standing on the sidewalk, their faces a mixture of shock and anger. Among them was his best friend, Jaden, who immediately pulled out his phone. "Yo, Marcus. You good?" Jaden called out. Marcus nodded, but he knew he wasn't. Inside the patrol car, Marcus could hear the police radio crackle with updates about a robbery that had taken place just a few blocks away. The suspect? A 6-foot-tall man in a black hoodie. Marcus was wearing a blue hoodie, and he stood at just 5 feet 9 inches. "I don't match that description," he said, trying to reason with the officers. "This has to be a mistake." Reynolds chuckled, shaking his head. "That's what they all say," he muttered. Marcus swallowed hard. His mind raced as he tried to think of a way to prove his innocence. Then he remembered his phone had been recording in his pocket since the moment they approached him. It was a habit he had developed after seeing too many cases of injustice on the news. As they pulled up to the station, Marcus was led inside, past rows of curious officers who barely gave him a second glance. They processed him quickly, taking his fingerprints and mugshot before leading him to an interrogation room. His heart pounded as he was shoved into a chair, the cold metal biting into his skin. Officer Reynolds sat across from him, leaning forward with a smirk. "You're in a lot of trouble, kid," he said. "We've got witnesses placing you at the scene of the robbery." Marcus frowned. "That's impossible," he replied, keeping his voice even. "I was with my friend Jaden the whole time. He can vouch for me." Reynolds chuckled. "See, that's the thing. People will say anything to protect their buddies. But we have real evidence." He slid a file across the table. Marcus didn't touch it. He knew they were bluffing. His hands were still cuffed when his mother arrived, her face a mask of fury and concern. "What is going on here?" she demanded, her voice commanding. Marcus exhaled in relief. His mother was a lawyer, and she wasn't about to let this slide. Reynolds barely glanced at her. "Your son was caught near the scene of a robbery," he said dismissively. "We have witnesses." But before Marcus's mother could argue, Marcus took a deep breath and said, "Check my phone. It's been recording everything." A flicker of doubt crossed Reynolds's face, but he quickly recovered. "That won't prove anything," he said. Marcus's mother wasted no time. "Then let's see what it recorded," she said coolly. Marcus knew what was on that phone, the entire interaction from the moment they stopped him. He knew it would expose the officers' lies, the lack of probable cause, and the racial profiling that had led to his arrest. As the officers hesitated, his mother pulled out her own phone. "If you refuse, I'll make sure this goes straight to the media," she said. "And trust me, the courts won't like this one bit." Reynolds shifted uncomfortably in his seat. The weight of the situation was finally beginning to sink in. Marcus sat up straighter, his confidence returning. "Play the recording," he said. "Let's hear exactly what happened." The interrogation room was tense, the air thick with unspoken accusations. Officer Reynolds tapped his fingers on the metal table, his smirk faltering as Marcus's mother held her phone up, ready to escalate the situation. Marcus sat quietly, his wrists still bound by cold steel cuffs, his pulse steady despite the injustice weighing on him. He had seen cases like this on TV, but now he was living one. "Fine," Reynolds finally grumbled, reaching for Marcus's phone. He unlocked it and scrolled through the voice recordings. The file was there, time-stamped, proving it had been running since the moment they stopped him. His jaw clenched as he pressed play. The room filled with the crackling sound of recorded footsteps, a slight shuffle as Marcus adjusted his hoodie, then the gruff voice of Officer Carter. "You match the description." Marcus's recorded voice came next, clear and calm. "Description of what?" The room fell silent as the recording continued. It captured every moment. Reynolds and Carter's refusal to answer, their aggressive shoving, the unnecessary force as they slammed Marcus against the car. It even recorded Jaden's voice from the crowd. "Yo, Marcus. You good?" Reynolds swallowed hard. He had been so confident in his lie, so sure that this would be just another routine arrest, another black kid without evidence, without a chance. But now the truth was playing back at them with undeniable clarity. Marcus's mother crossed her arms. "This proves they had no probable cause," she said firmly. "They had no right to stop my son. No right to detain him. No right to humiliate him like this." The sergeant in charge of the precinct had entered the room moments before, drawn in by the commotion. He frowned as he listened, his sharp eyes darting between Reynolds and Carter. "Is this accurate?" he asked, his voice low and dangerous. Reynolds licked his lips, but before he could speak, Carter, who had been silent the whole time, blurted out, "Sir, we thought—" "You thought wrong," the sergeant interrupted. His face was stormy now, a vein pulsing at his temple. "I want a full explanation." "No." Marcus knew the walls were closing in on them. "Sir, we genuinely believed he was a suspect," Reynolds tried again, but his voice lacked its usual arrogance. He was in the area." The sergeant raised his hand to silence him. "That's not enough. That's never enough." He turned to Marcus. "Son, do you have an alibi?" Marcus straightened in his seat. "I was at Jaden's house. We were watching a game. He can confirm, and so can his family. The entire block saw me there." The sergeant sighed, rubbing his forehead. "Then this arrest is invalid." Marcus's mother wasn't done. "Invalid," she scoffed. "You think we're just going to walk out of here and pretend this never happened? My son was profiled, assaulted, and wrongfully detained." The sergeant glanced at her, his expression unreadable. "Ma'am, I understand your frustration, but—" "No," she snapped. "You don't understand. This isn't just frustration. This is systemic. This is abuse of power. And I will make sure this department is held accountable." The room was suffocatingly silent. Then Marcus spoke. "I want an apology." Carter's head snapped toward him, his mouth opening as if to protest, but the sergeant held up a hand. He turned back to Reynolds. "You heard the kid." Reynolds's face was red, his pride visibly warring with the reality of the situation. He was being forced to admit wrongdoing, to acknowledge that he had abused his badge. He opened his mouth, hesitated, then finally mumbled, "I apologize." Marcus raised a brow. "For what?" Reynolds exhaled sharply through his nose. "For the wrongful arrest." The words felt bitter on his tongue. "For assuming you were guilty before knowing the facts." The sergeant's gaze shifted to Carter. "You too." Carter was less composed than Reynolds. His fists clenched at his sides before he muttered, "I'm sorry. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough." But Marcus had something many others didn't, a recording. Proof. A mother who would fight for him. A story that wouldn't be buried. Marcus's mother wasn't finished. "We'll be filing a formal complaint. I want internal affairs involved. I want them investigated for every wrongful arrest they've made." The sergeant nodded. "You'll have full cooperation." Reynolds looked like he wanted to disappear. Carter looked like he wanted to hit something. Marcus, however, felt something else entirely, justice. His mother leaned in, her voice softening. "Are you okay?" Marcus nodded. "Yeah," he said, exhaling. "I am now." But he wasn't done. He knew this wasn't just about him. It was about every black teen who had ever been stopped for matching a description. Every innocent person who had been slammed against a car. Every voice that had been silenced. And he wasn't going to stay quiet. Marcus had walked out of that police station with his mother, But he knew this wasn't over. The truth was on his side, but truth alone didn't always mean justice. He had the recording, the forced apology, and a promise from the sergeant that an internal investigation would be conducted. But promises from the system didn't mean much when that same system had just tried to bury him. The following morning, Marcus sat at the kitchen table, his phone in his hand. His mother was across from him, scrolling through emails from lawyers. "They'll try to sweep this under the rug," she said, sipping her coffee. "We can't let them." Marcus nodded. "I was thinking, what if we post the video?" His mother hesitated, setting down her mug. "It could go viral," she admitted. "But are you ready for that? It won't just be support, Marcus. You'll get backlash too. People who'll try to justify what happened." Marcus clenched his jaw. "I don't care. People need to see this. It's not just about me. It's about everyone this has happened to who didn't have proof, who couldn't fight back." His mother studied him for a long moment, then gave a slow nod. "Then we posted. By noon, the video was up. Within an hour, it had 10,000 views. By the time the sun set, it had reached 100,000. And then everything exploded. National news picked it up. Celebrities reshared it, demanding accountability. Civil rights lawyers offered to represent Marcus pro bono. Activists in Atlanta organized protests outside the police station, demanding the immediate suspension of officers Reynolds and Carter. That night, Marcus's phone buzzed with a text from Jaden. "Jaden, bro, you're all over the news." Marcus exhaled, watching as the video played on TV. A panel of commentators debated his case, discussing racial profiling, police brutality, and the power of recorded evidence. His name was trending on social media. The pressure in the police department was undeniable. The next morning, the chief of police held a press conference. Marcus, his mother, and their lawyers stood in the crowd as the chief cleared his throat. "We are aware of the incident involving officers Reynolds and Carter and the wrongful detainment of Marcus Adams," he began. "The department does not condone racial profiling or misconduct of any kind. Effective immediately, both officers have been placed on unpaid leave pending further investigation." The crowd murmured. Some people cheered. Others, like Marcus, remained skeptical. "That's not enough," his mother muttered under her breath. The reporters didn't hold back. "Chief, will the department issue a formal apology?" one asked. The chief hesitated, then exhaled. "We acknowledge the harm caused to Marcus Adams and his family. We sincerely apologize for this incident and assure the public that steps are being taken to ensure this does not happen again." Marcus didn't buy it. Words were easy. Change wasn't. After the press conference, their lawyer approached them. "It's good progress," he said, "but we're not stopping here. We're filing an official lawsuit against the department." Marcus nodded. "I want to make sure this doesn't just get brushed aside once people stop paying attention." His mother squeezed his shoulder. "We'll keep fighting." For the next several weeks, the city of Atlanta became the epicenter of a national discussion on racial profiling and police accountability. More victims came forward with stories of mistreatment at the hands of Reynolds and Carter. The public outcry was too loud to ignore. The mayor announced a full review of the department's practices. The DA's office opened a criminal investigation into the two officers. And then Marcus got a call from a number he didn't recognize. "This is Marcus," he answered cautiously. "Marcus," a woman's voice said. "This is Lisa Thompson. I'm an investigative journalist with the Atlanta Sentinel. I've been looking into Reynolds and Carter for a while now. I think you should see what I found." Marcus exchanged a look with his mother. "What is it?" Lisa sighed. "They've done this before. A lot. And worse." Marcus's stomach twisted. "Send me everything you have." Within minutes, his inbox was filled with documents, reports of wrongful arrests, complaints that were ignored, stories from black teens who had been harassed, bullied, even physically assaulted by the same officers who had detained him. But the worst part? Some of these reports had reached the higher-ups, and nothing had been done. Marcus clenched his fists. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about exposing everything. 2 weeks later, the Atlanta Sentinel published an expose titled, The untouchable officers of Atlanta. How a police department ignored abuse for years. It blew everything wide open. The police chief resigned. Internal Affairs launched a full-scale investigation. The mayor promised immediate reforms. And most importantly, Reynolds and Carter were arrested. Marcus watched the news that night, sitting beside his mother. He had started this fight for himself. But now it was about so much more. As the screen showed footage of Reynolds and Carter being led out of the precinct in cuffs, Marcus finally exhaled. Justice wasn't instant. It wasn't easy. But sometimes it did happen. And he had helped make it happen.